faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. The strange visitor from the planet Krypton, the Man of Steel, Superman. Was really bizarre in the Silver Age, and let's have a discussion about that, shall we? So, I apologize if the opening was a bit misleading. Though we are going to be talking somewhat about the Silver Age. It's, or more specifically, a phenomenon I like to call the Silver Age effect. It's something I alluded to making a video in actually the second video I'd actually made, and I'll put a little info card up here, right? And then put a link in the description below to that video. It'll probably end up in the end card. And I'm finally getting around to making this video because like I said last week, I'm trying to clear my backlog. So, what is this, what I call the Silver Age effect? And simply put, the Silver Age effect is, the Silver Age effect is the phenomenon where the censorship of a genre tends to correlate with the fact that the genre gets kind of batshit crazy. So, before what was regarded as the Silver Age began, the comics industry implemented the Comics Code Authority, or the CCA, and once again, I'll refer to my previous video where I literally just read big chunks of it. The Comics Code Authority was a set of guidelines to where these were the only these were the only stories you were allowed to try and publish. And if you didn't, then you didn't get the seal of approval. And if you didn't get the seal of approval, then then you couldn't really get your merchandise out because most stores wouldn't carry the comic books, which were the product of note at the time. Because the comics industry hadn't quite evolved into the merchandising behemoth that it is, where the books themselves are rather tertiary to what, the product placement, so to speak. And there is another rather notable instance, a rather notable genre that's very much shaped by censorship, and that is Christian fiction, specifically in regards to fantasy, sci-fi, and even horror. My Lit Month playlist has a video where I go through a Christian YA horror series and just go over how nuts that can get. Originally, I was planning on using the Dragons in Our Midst series as a kind of example for how crazy Christian fantasy can get. But I'm thinking that'll make a better video for Lit Month 2.0. So this September, because I'm gonna be doing Lit Month as an annual thing, just in support, in support / celebration of Banned Book Week. It's a very me thing to do. So unless there's an uproar in the comments, I'm gonna be saving that particular exploration for Lit Month because that fits in much better. But anyways, tangent aside, let's get back on topic. So, first, a quick disclaimer. I understand that it's not a perfect comparison because comic books are also, a medium in and of itself as opposed to as opposed to just being purely a genre. However, what we recognize as the comic book genre, i.e., Cape Crusaders, heroes in spandex, and fighting dastardly villains in a modern, setting. Your Spider-Man, your Superman, your Flash, your Green Lantern, your X-Men, your Thor, your modern interpretation of Thor, your Iron Man, the comic book superhero genre was very much shaped, you know, by the restrictions imposed by the Comics Code Authority in the Silver Age. In fact, the fact that we view the superhero story as synonymous with the comic book genre it's a direct consequence of the of this of the stipulations of the Comics Code, because the Comics Code outright bans several separate genres that were popular at the time from being from appearing in comics, in the medium comic books. So, and and Christian literature or Christian fiction is very much still being shaped by this unofficial attitude of censorship that perpetuates the evangelical community. I'll point back to my videos on the aesthetic of evil in regards to what's pretty much verboten when it comes to Christian literature, what's okay for a good Christian boy to read. It's and how and that video is a much better explanation of why things like fantasy, things like horror, things like thrillers are very much a gray area when it comes to Christian readers, and why there's such strict limitations on what can be written in Christian horror, in Christian fantasy. And because you can't really do anything with other mythologies, because that would be promoting idolatry and paganism, and other gods are demonic. So you're not supposed to be reading about them, and you're not supposed to be putting them, God forbid, in your Christian fiction book. And you can't really, and touching on actual biblical lore is also somewhat verboten, because you can't imply that the Bible is not true and call yourself a Christian author. Or at least when it comes to fundamentalist evangelicals, who seem to be the biggest customer base for Christian literature. For the genre of Christian fiction, because they're getting things for their kids to read. Like, and once again, the Raising Dragons is gonna be popping up. The Dragons in Our Midst series is going to be popping up in this discussion as an example, but I will be going more in depth on that series during Lit Month, unless I get raked over the coals and have to do it earlier. It's just more thematic. Get over it. And exploring biblical themes can also, or biblical lore, is also very much a danger zone in that, you've got you've got the people who would boycott you for making it appear that the Bible is fiction by using biblical lore in your, Christian fiction novel. And you've got the people who would boycott you for blasphemy, for for whatever liberties that you do in fact take. Like, for instance, Good Omens, while being far from a Christian fiction, book, written by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett, does heavily involve, Christian lore, the Christian mythology, though you can't really call it biblical lore in that a lot of what we regard as Christian mythology comes from extra biblical sources such as Dante Alighieri, which is, should be a video in and of its own right. And here I am again teasing videos that I may not even make. So anyways, back on topic. So, comic book, the comic book superhero genre and Christian fictions, in particular fantasy and horror, or, Christian fiction with supernatural themes, are both very much shaped by the constraints of a culture of censorship. The comic book genre isn't so much anymore because they did away with the Comics Code Authority in the 90s. It, not all at once, it just kind of fell out of fate. People kept pushing the boundaries of what was allowable, and it just kind of crumbled away. Eventually people just outright ignored it, and I think the last comic, the last series to actually carry the Comics Code Authority seal of approval was the Archie comics, which are also really, really surreal and bizarre. Seriously, there's like an issue where the Punisher just randomly shows up in Archie. Yeah, and there are aliens in Archie. So, but that's 100% beside the point. Or, or perhaps, enhances the point where when there's a limited scope of what you're actually allowed to say in your media, your creativity has to go somewhere. So instead of exploring other themes, other ideas, you just go off the wall. You have things where, like, the Flash gains like 300 pounds suddenly, so he's the Fat instead of the Flash. But anyways, all that creativity has to go somewhere. And also, in a capitalist society, you've got to, where the media you're producing, the works that you are producing is a product, and you've got to differentiate yourself, from other people's products, or else you won't get as much attention and you won't make as much money. So when in a less constrained environment, you can very easily, separate yourself from the pack by exploring other themes, by exploring themes of violence, themes of mysticism, themes of other mythologies, lifting from other cultures for ideas, and creating a more cohesive, and, well, I wouldn't call comic approaches to mythologies cohesive, but creating a more elaborate tapestry of ideas and themes. But in a constrained, censored culture, you can't really explore those other themes. So you have to differentiate yourself by going further and further off the wall with just look at how weird we can make this. And I'm not, well, in the Silver Age, that could very well have been that could have very well been a contributing factor. That could have very well been a motivation. I'm not saying that in terms of Christian fiction, though. That's very much we've got to get this to the kids so they can get indoctrinated, or I have this story that I want to tell, and there are these constraints, so I work within these constraints to the best that I can. Like, once again, Dragons in Our Midst it delves pretty heavily into Arthurian lore, and then also takes a really bizarre turn, like, midway through the series, and delves into, like, the Nephilim and stuff. And actually, I've noticed that in Christian fiction, like pre-flood, Christian fantasy, pre-flood and the Nephilim are everywhere. And that's probably because, aside from like angels and demons, those are like the only real, well, the Nephilim are are supposedly half angels. So, but they get a couple verses in the Bible, so they're practically a blank slate when it comes to what you want to put there, and they're pretty much the only thing, one of the few things that you can actually do anything with within the Christian mythos, and things like angels and demons have already been heavily the public already has a very concrete image of what an angel and what a demon is. So you can't subvert those tropes without pissing off pretty much your only customer base, because the evangelical consumer base that is, reading these, fiction novels, it will, tie you to a stake and, make a pyre out of your books, tie you to a stake, and then burn you with it, metaphorically speaking, burn you at the stake in a pyre of your own books, while some, sects would literally burn, those books. Some especially fervent congregations would burn those books for being blasphemous if you try to subvert certain tropes. And so thus we have these constraints. And thus we have just outright kind of, really out there kind of crazy, fiction. And I'm not saying that there's a definite causal link. I am saying there seems to be a strong correlation between a culture of censorship and just really out there, bizarre stories. And I know that correlation does not equal causation, but at times it can imply causation. And in this case, I heavily suspect that it's a correlation that implies causation, to where censorship strict cultures of censorship can cause just out there craziness, out there surreal craziness. And all I have, all I can really, and, that's essentially, several minutes on what I call the Silver Age effect in a nutshell. I'd welcome any further comments, any further discussion in the comments below on what you'd like to, on what you think about my concept of what I call the Silver Age effect, or any other examples that you can think of where heavy, cultures of heavy censorship in terms of genre and theme can lead to just bizarre off-the-wall stories. I'd really, really love to see that, see discussion on this topic in the comments below. And, go ahead, do the YouTube things, like, subscribe, ring the bell, share this to a friend who might be interested. Because, yeah, this video has been, a lot on my mind, like, practically from the beginning of my channel. And I'm, just finally getting it out. And with that, all I have left to say is, especially in regards to how you write your fiction, it seems, even there, indoctrination is a hell of a drug. Da, 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 da. Spider-Man, Spider-Man does whatever a spider can. Spins a web any size. He clicks like and then subscribes. Hey there goes the Spider-Man.